Remember, nothing I say should be taken as financial advice.
A potential dramatic shift of financial power coming, and it's going to be based around crypto. It's going to be based around crypto and stable coins and CBDCs.
A dramatic shift of power is coming. We are moving to a digital future with trustless automated systems that utilize crypto network, CBDC, and digital assets. The financial system gets an upgrade to the Internet of Value.
You couldn't truly say that we've already seen that major disruption, right? It isn't yet mainstream. We're still having this conversation.
You can point to areas such as the interbank settlement market, where there's now the JPM coin being used in place of a much older system. You can look at international remittances, where Ripple has begun to make incursions against the SWIFT network, but also caused the SWIFT network to modernize its own systems. You can look at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is trading Bitcoin futures now. I think we're going into almost the fourth year of this. And the incursions month by month into the regular financial system, if you had put averted your gaze for 6 months, you'd be astonished at how quickly things are changing for a technology that's barely 12 years old. So I would disagree that it's not in the mainstream. I think it's moving much more quickly into the mainstream than most people realize. And you look at the valuation of Coinbase, which is on par with the very biggest banks, the Morgan Stanleys and other firms. And you realize that there is the arrival of a very new technology that especially appeals to the next generation. And if you sit this one out and don't take it seriously, there's a great risk of being left behind for something very, very important.
If we look at what Ripple has done, they started off with nothing and now have 500 plus banks on RippleNet. We see Swift reacting by updating their systems after years of nothing. They call this a bubble, but the tulip bubble did not have multiple bull runs. This is real. The focus leaves and comes back. It will always come back because crypto and blockchain technology is changing the world.
More and more oil to keep growing their economy. They have to keep growing their economy or else they have social unrest. They need more and more oil to grow their economy. That oil is priced in dollars. They only have so many dollars in reserves. Once they run out of dollar reserves, then they either have to stop buying as much oil, in which case their economy slows, they have social unrest, they can't pay their debt, their economy collapses, or they devalue their currency. They have higher hyperinflation of oil and food, which also is one of their key risks. And so he's been on the media waves for the last 3 to 5 years, effectively talking about weaponizing oil through the dollar, weaponizing the dollar through oil, however you want to phrase it. And that's the problem. And so China needs to get away from, they're never going to be able to produce enough oil. That's not an option. So they've gone around the world buying up oil supplies, etc. They're never going to be able to produce enough oil for what they need, so they need to import it. But if they need to import it, then to avoid this inevitable currency crisis and economic collapse, they have to be able to buy oil in their own currency, a currency they can print. And that's why, ultimately, for China, it's a matter of national security to get away from this, from the dollar monopoly on oil. And the Russians know the same thing. And so it's almost like this, it's like it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because obviously the Russians and the Chinese have not had throughout history, they've not tended to be natural allies. But ultimately, you sort of have to face your challenges in order. And number one challenge for both of them is the dollar system, as it's structured. There's a great meme out there. Of course Iran is threatening us. Look how close they put their country to all our military bases. Right, and they show all of the military bases surrounding Iran, surrounding China, surrounding Russia, and so if you look at it from both sides, I really think what we're watching is sort of this competition for resources, competition for the structure of the system, who gets a say for the system. There are different constituencies within each country regarding who likes the system, who doesn't like the system. To my earlier point about there's a lot of people in America getting rich with doing business with China, and others being hurt by it. So you have internal struggles, concurrent with this. But I don't know that it's a domino theory as much as it is just realpolitik around resources. Russia's the world's biggest energy exporter, and they're willing to sell oil to China in Chinese currency. And that is something no other American adversaries ever had. So I think it's much more, I think there's ideological differences, but I think there's a lot of it is driven by much more nearer term realpolitik and pragmatic drivers that are designed out of weaknesses, right? Trying to defend weaknesses that China has or that Russia has, rather than starting from a point of we're going to go get the Americans. I think it's more, oh gosh, we need to make sure we prevent this from happening. What's the best way to prevent this from happening? It's to partner with Russia.
Russia accepting the digital yuan for oil is something that will be written about in history books. The economic circumstances of today are rhyming with previous global events that changed the world forever, like World War II or Bretton Woods. On an average, empires will have 250 years. The U.S. is 244 years old.
So I would describe the Great Reset as a marketing plan for non-financial people of the Going Direct Reset. So the G7 central bankers met on August 22nd, 2019 and voted on a plan called Going Direct, which is a fundamental re-engineering of the financial system. And it consolidates what I describe as a financial coup, which has been happening since 1996 and the beginning of that wave of globalization. And if you look at what the central bankers are doing, it's going to create a very centrally controlled world.
Before the 2020 lockdowns, BlackRock issued a report that directed central banks to team up with treasuries and blur the line of fiscal policy and monetary policy. This is the Great Reset, and we know that crypto blockchain CBDC is going to play an integral role in the Great Reset.
5 years, I've never seen the amount of crosswinds that we're seeing now. And what's fascinating is every aspect where you're reaching an extreme, you're reaching long levels of extremes, right? So we've gone through 80 years of globalization, and that's reversing. And we've gone through 30 years of this U.S.-China relationship, and that's reversing. And we've gone through 40 years of a debt cycle and interest rates, and that's reversing. And you just go on. And each of these are, we've gone through 70 years of a demographic cycle, and that's sort of going upside down in terms of going cash flow negative on entitlements. And so you've got all of these things that are all moving they've all reached extremes, and if any one of them snaps, I think they all kind of start to snap in sort of short order. And I think that's sort of one of two key takeaways. I think it's once it happens, once something triggers it, again, I think inflation could very well be the trigger. It's interesting, if we go back to August 2019, former Fed Vice Chair Stan Fischer, former Swiss National Bank Philip Hildebrand, and former Bank of Canada Governor Jean Boivin wrote a white paper for the BlackRock Institute, dealing with the next downturn. And it was basically laying out the game plan for, in the next downturn, here's what we're going to have to do. The central banks are out of ammo on their own. They're going to have to pair with the fiscal authorities, and so the fiscal authorities are going to have to spend. And then the central banks will have to cap rates to make sure there's no offsetting rise in interest rates that hurts the fiscal stimulus. And it's incredible how few people on Wall Street have read this piece. I've been talking about it for a lot. I know Grant's been talking about it as well. But there's something in there that again, former Fed Vice Chair Stan Fischer, just to frame it up for the audience, is one of my best relationships on the street calls him the Godfather, right? He was Draghi's tutor or mentor. He was Bernanke's mentor. He is the man, right? And oh, by the way, he also did one of the seminal diagnoses of the Israeli hyperinflation in the early 80s. So he knows, he's lived through this, he's diagnosed how these monetary reforms, as it was called in Israel. And so what they said in this paper is really incredible, is after they lay out, hey, the fiscal needs to spend a lot, the central banks need to monetize it and cap rates, is this helicopter money, this is just handing out money to people, and the central bank handing out money to people through the fiscal authorities is all it is. We know will generate inflation. It will absolutely generate inflation. We are sure we can do that. And here we are today, and we see it's absolutely worked. What's incredible is the Godfather, Stan Fischer, goes on to say, the challenge is that there are no instances of history of getting the genie back in the bottle his words, not mine, or fine-tuning this program for just the right amount of inflation. And I think we're now seeing that, but markets don't get that yet. They've not read this. They don't understand. And then you go back to this context of there is no ability for the Fed to tighten. They can't. And the reason they can't is because if you look at U.S. Treasury spending plus U.S. entitlement pay-goes, it's still over 100% of tax receipts. So the U.S.'s real interest expense is still more than 100% of tax receipts, with tax receipts at all-time highs, with bubbles in every friggin' market. So if they tighten, they're going to decline. They're going to lead tax receipts to decline, and then unless the Fed prints the difference, the U.S. will default on entitlements or treasuries, and that's where we are. And markets don't understand this yet, but I think they're probably within a few months of understanding it. And when they do, the bond market is going to go, oh my God, the only choice the Fed has is to QE more into this accelerating inflation because they have to contain rates. And when you look at sort of the great and I don't want to call it hyperinflation, the great high inflations in history, they've generally all had one thing in common, which is a sovereign that can print money trying to keep interest rates at a politically and economically expedient level. And the nice thing is this thing could be over in 6 months. Maybe you could send inflation to, 50, 100% for a couple of quarters, and U.S. debt to GDP will be 70%. The Fed can normalize rates, and it'll be just like that.
The inflation is going to continue, and central bank digital currencies are a tool for deeply negative interest rates and for direct lines from the central bank to the people. The blurred line that BlackRock discussed in its paper between fiscal policy and monetary policy happens with central bank digital currencies.
The White House is weighing whether to issue an executive order to a number of federal agencies to get their recommendations on how they would oversee the assets. We're looking at the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, the National Science Foundation, the National Security Council, the SEC, the Commodity Future Trading Commission, the IRS. So there is a whole alphabet soup there of federal agencies that, if this order comes out, would likely recommend to the White House how they would oversee it, and then the White House's, the crypto czar's job would be to coordinate all of that across the government.
The big question, though, here, Wendy, is why? What is the sort of end goal here by the White House and by the potential agencies that would be overseeing this here? I mean, for all that we talk about Bitcoin and the other crypto assets, this is still, at least relative to other financial markets, a relatively niche area.
Absolutely, but I think it's a recognition by the administration that this isn't some, boutique, high-tech, nerdy thing out there that some people do. That this is a increasingly item that is being taken seriously in financial markets, being used in financial markets. So
the Biden administration is pushing for crypto oversight with an alphabet soup of regulators. This is being used in financial markets, and here comes the regulations.
Response and a very detailed and in-depth response to the FATF's request for commentary on this. And you can see there an example from Kristen's organization, the Blockchain Association, which provided, I think, a very, very thorough response to some of these changes that, again, are expected to be approved in the next couple of weeks. So
the Financial Action Task Force is getting ready to regulate exchanges in the next couple of weeks. Like the U.S., the international working groups are leaning in. Nothing happens, then everything happens at once.
That will have an impact on monetary policy, funds flow, but also privacy and tracking not only of everything that's out there, but also consumer transactions. So this is an area that I think every government, every regulator needs to be thinking about. There is a potential dramatic shift of financial power coming, and it's going to be based around crypto and stable coins and CBDCs. And we all know which countries are building them and which ones aren't.
There is a dramatic shift of power coming, and it's going to revolve around crypto and central bank digital currencies and blockchain. He said, "We know what countries are developing them and which ones are not. We know China is developing the BSN network and has a pilot for their CBDC. We know that the Fed is not. There is a great reset that BlackRock has been guiding central banks on their policy, and CBDC will aid in those recommendations. Oil is priced in dollars while China and Russia are moving away from the petrodollar standard, and the Great Reset promotes a green economy that is not dependent on oil. We are watching the old financial system being systematically dismantled and the next-gen financial system being built, where there is no need for reserve currencies.
And the thing that people should understand is just how quickly it happens. Once it reaches that terminal phase, and once it takes too much to defend the system than it does to topple it over, the end will happen fairly quickly. The Berlin Wall coming down happened like that. Now, if you look back at it, and you look back through Gorbachev, and you look back at Glasnost and Perestroika, and you can see how it happened. But at the time, the reporting, the coverage of the Berlin Wall coming down was, oh my God, the Berlin Wall's coming down, and communism fell over overnight. When you look back at these things, the speed with which they actually unravel, to the extent that everybody understands what's going on, is faster than you can even comprehend. And the same thing is likely to happen to the dollar. So trying to put a time on this is, it's kind of futile, frankly, until you can see the end in sight, and then it'll happen very fast. But I think the thing that's happened over the last 5-6 years, and nobody's frankly written or talked about this better than Luke. I think Luke's been absolutely all over this, and brilliantly so. I have to say, Luke, it's entertaining these possibilities. It's refusing to just dispel this idea that the US dollar will lose its reserve currency status. People will just say, oh, well, that's ridiculous, which is such a dangerous attitude to have. It will happen.
Neither love nor terror makes one blind. Indifference makes one blind. James Baldwin. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you hit the like and comment, it will help my channel a great deal, because the more likes and comments, the more the YouTube algorithm will suggest my videos to others. If you enjoy my content and are interested in supporting my channel, please consider my Patreon, where I add videos early, ad-free, and offer research and Discord access.